If you are a Max Verstappen or a Red Bull fan, you already would know who Gianpiero Lambiase is. He has been Max Verstappen's race engineer since Max stepped foot inside Red Bull Racing back in 2016. Many who have focused closely will know what sort of a relationship Max and GP, as we call him, has had over the years. Over the team radio, Max on certain instances won't be very pleasant, which his race engineer deals calmly. But at last weekend's Belgian Grand Prix, things just went on to the next level between Max and GP. So, what is really happening at Max Verstappen's side of the garage? Going through the third stint of the 2023 Belgian Grand Prix, you undoubtedly overheard Gianpiero Lambiase trying to correct his driver Max Verstappen for using his new tires too aggressively. He used a lot of the tire on the outlap Max. Not sure that was sensible. Then a minute or so after no reply, GP continued. There was reasonable dag in the last stint. I'd advise you to use your head a bit more. It was simply the most recent of many such annoyances that, since they began working together at Barcelona in 2016, seemed to get worse as they became accustomed to one another. Halfway through 2014, Red Bull hired Lambiasi from Force India because Red Bull team boss Christian Horner heard that he was strong-willed and practical. Exactly the kind of person who could take Guillaume Roquelin's place as Sebastian Vettel's race engineer, as Roquelin was getting promoted within the organization itself. So, following the expected interview, Lambiasi was brought before Vettel and questioned. He left a lasting impression on everyone, including Sebastian Vettel. Following Vettel's departure for Ferrari, Lambiasi was ultimately responsible for designing Daniel Kvyat's Red Bull, until Verstappen, a teenage phenomenon, took the Russian's spot after a little over a season. So Lambiasi has personally experienced the transition from unbridled genius to one of the finest athletes the sport has ever produced. He undoubtedly contributed to that progress. However, their relationship hasn't really altered. Lambiasi is still the strict elder brother who needs to make sure Max doesn't recklessly jeopardize the team's success, while Max is still the occasionally misbehaving little child, regardless of how many of them he has already won. Max is very content with that dynamic, enjoys playing about with it and assuming the role of authority, is completely confident in his own abilities, knows how far he can push it, and is aware that it makes GP uncomfortable. But when there is a competitive urgency for a decision, it can quickly transition from being humorous to serious. If everything is not going well, Max can even change from calm mischief to wrath, and Lambiasi regularly takes the brunt of it. Each of them gives it out and receives it back. When many asked Christian Horner about the relationship between GP and Max, and how they deal tense situations, the team boss said, "Yes, but with Max it's pretty much forgotten straight away." Whereas with GP, he remembers a little longer. Verstappen was upset during the Belgian Grand Prix qualifying on Friday's Q2 period, when a drying track and issues with battery charge and tire temperatures nearly caused them to miss Q3. Okay, well, if you want to decide the tire offset, the run plan, the traffic gaps, we can do that for Q3, said Lambiasi, giving it back just as hard as Verstappen had given it to him before. After then going fastest in Q3 by around 9/10, Max was apologetic for his earlier tone, for which GP replied, "I'm just about getting used to it." Verstappen started the main race's first stint in 6th place on the grid due to a gearbox penalty, so there wasn't much to say as he cautiously made his way up the field, very similar to this time last year. After Verstappen's gearbox penalty cost him the pole, Charles Leclerc took the lead into La Source, but Sergio Perez was able to slipstream the Ferrari and make a decisive pass on the Kemmel Straight. Leclerc was unable to respond and instead focused on Lewis Hamilton's Mercedes in his rearview mirrors. Verstappen had gained some ground as Carlos Sainz and Oscar Piastri collided at La Source while crammed in close because Hamilton had taken the outside route. They entered 3 abreast, but just one person emerged unscathed. Max lifted while being careful not to interfere. Even though he was in a DRS train, where Hamilton was taking over from Leclerc and preventing Verstappen from slipstreaming ahead, he maintained his composure. Verstappen, on the other hand, depleted Hamilton's energy store charge by making him drive defensively for a few laps before making a straightforward DRS pass ahead of Leclerc on the 6th lap. With the same soft compound tires, he lapped up to half a second quicker than his teammate Perez, who was dominating the race, to move up to 3rd place. 3 laps later, the defending world champion made a daring run on Leclerc around Leclerc on the outside with far more speed, closing the gap to Perez to just 3 seconds. The conversations between Max and Lambiasi have now started. They had clearly discussed a number of eventualities before the race and how they may respond to them, just like all drivers do with their race engineers. So at this point, their conversation contained a coded element. Most likely, it was about how they were going to pass the other Red Bull. Since he was close enough to make this work, coming in first and undercutting ahead was the easiest course of action when working just with the numbers. But for the team to prioritize the pit stop of the second-placed vehicle over Perez would be a rather controversial move. Verstappen would undoubtedly be able to pass Perez on the track at some point, either before or after the first stops, due to his incredible pace advantage. The question of whether this race would involve one stop or two stops complicated the situation even further. The soft tires performed far better than anticipated, and wear was also unproblematic. They were still far from the first stop, so if it was going to be a one stop, Max would likely be free to attack and overtake Perez. Although they might be able to pass without the risk of going wheel to wheel if it was a two-stop race, from the standpoint of the team, that would involve a different kind of risk. The anticipated rain in about 10 minutes drove them towards a lengthy initial stint. The later you could stop, the fresher your new tires would be when the rain started. It wasn't anticipated to be heavy enough to require intermediates. Several times already GP had cautioned Max to use his head without making specific reference to what. While the conversation continued between Max and GP, Lambiasi counseled his driver to just follow instructions. Max said he wanted to know both sides and was told once again to follow his instructions. There was a definite edge to whatever this conversation was about. However, Hamilton, who was by this point having trouble on his initial soft tires, made the choice for them about whether to do one or two stops, and Mercedes elected to attempt the undercut on Leclerc while they still had the opportunity. This was lap 12 of 44. Leclerc and Perez covered him off by pitting on the following lap as a result of this. Verstappen's stop was timed to occur on the next lap, which in turn decided when it happened. All of them had changed to the medium tire, but they had done it early enough to suggest a two-stop race. After stopping, Max's first flying lap was almost 1 second quicker than Perez's, which is probably what irked Lambiasi a little. Max is completely capable of determining where that places since he wants to leave nothing on the table. Lambiasi seeks to achieve the result with the least amount of risk. They frequently have spirited talks at the space between those two goals. To the loud cheers of the fans, Verstappen passed Perez 3 laps after returning to take the lead. After 3 laps, rain started to fall on the racetrack. It wasn't heavy, but it was enough to make driving on slicks difficult. Despite a significant tank slapper up the hill following on the 21st lap, Verstappen improved his advantage over Perez to 5 seconds between laps 20 and 22. On the following lap, Perez experienced a brief moment himself. After that, the rain stopped, but not before allowing Lando Norris to momentarily achieve a fantastic pace even in comparison to Verstappen and the big wing McLaren. This elevated him to 7th place and saved his race from obscurity. The second time around, Hamilton started the stops among the top 4 once more. On lap 27, he attempted to undercut Leclerc once more before switching back to soft tires, forcing the Ferrari driver to follow suit the following lap. Leclerc maintained his lead as they struggled far away from Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin, which would shortly be followed by George Russell's Mercedes that was making a comeback. Leclerc momentarily believed he could catch Perez, but because the Ferrari ran short on fuel, that pursuit had to be abandoned. As Verstappen rejoined on his fresh softs, he lapped over 2 seconds faster than Perez. That was completely superfluous in Lambiasi's opinion, which is why he was reprimanded for not using his head. Verstappen wasn't really pushing that hard though in reality. Although Lambiasi shouted on the radio, his communication with Horner painted a different picture. Verstappen's onboard clearly shows very cautious braking and turning, nothing dramatic. The engineers and performance engineers are living and breathing the data in front of them. They know the driver's driving style, they know what they are taking out of the car, and I was asking GP, I know what he's doing here, he's trying to build up a gap for a pit stop. GP said, yes, but actually I think he's taking it pretty easy. All the metrics are massively under control. Max did intend to gain a pit stop's worth of distance, possibly as much to irritate Lambiasi as for the additional point for the fastest lap that a third stop would essentially ensure. Shall I push on and do another stop? Max asked. Some pit stop training. No, not this time, replied GP in reference to Max's similar antics in Austria. GP's conservatism prevented the full haul of points as Hamilton pitted near the end for new tires, such was his big margin over Alonso, and proceeded to take the fastest lap point from Verstappen. I know that the team doesn't like to do another stop, but I like to mention it so they might get a bit nervous. And then I like the response, no, we're not doing that today. It's fine. We know each other very well and we have a very good relationship. His winning margin over Perez was 22 seconds, half a minute over Leclerc. It could definitely have been a lot more. His margin here was extraordinary, just as last year. I did slow down, Verstappen said. Of course, we all look at the numbers, we look at the wear of the tire and this track is super hard on the tires, so you don't want to do any unnecessary things. So that's what we did till the end. even if it occasionally looked alarming to GP. Christian Horner talked more about this. What we are witnessing with Max at the moment is something you see once in a generation. Like all the great drivers, he has that extra capacity. And what we're witnessing and seeing with him at the moment is his ability to read a tire, read a race, extract absolutely everything out of it. It's great to see. He is just at the top of his form at the moment. Out of the order, conversations between GP and Max has been a classic for us fans. But Belgium, I would say, was on a different level. Yet, Christian confirmed that those incidents are not going to leave a mark, as that's what's making the relationship between GP and Max even stronger. But what do you guys think? Is the situation between Lambiasi and Max ever going to get worse? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section down below. We'd love to discuss it with you. And on your way down, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get notified of our future uploads, to keep yourselves up to date about the 2023 Formula 1 season.